There's a generation psychology struggled to classify for years. They grew up dialing numbers on rotary phones, but also witnessed the exact moment smartphones reshaped the world. If you were born roughly between 1976 and 1985, you sit at the edge of Gen X, yet you don't quite feel like a millennial either. People keep trying to sort you into one category or the other, but neither label fits. So behavioral researchers eventually gave this group its own name, Xennials. Some sociologists even call it a microgeneration because the time window that shaped you was so narrow and so unusual. Something about that specific slice of history shaped a psychological profile that's genuinely fascinating. Because you didn't just grow up during change, you grew up inside it. Your childhood happened in an analog world, a time when boredom wasn't something you escaped, it was something you learned to sit with. You memorized phone numbers. If you missed your favorite show, there was no replay waiting for you. It was just gone. And then, just as you stepped into adulthood, everything flipped. Not slowly, suddenly. Most generations develop entirely inside one technological reality, but you lived in two completely different worlds during the exact years you were figuring out who you were. Your teenage years looked nothing like your 20s, and psychologically, that distance between stages was wider than most people ever experience. Think about it. You spent part of your life passing handwritten notes, making plans you couldn't confirm, and showing up places simply hoping your friends would be there. That required trust, patience, commitment. Then, almost overnight, communication multiplied. Phones, messaging, social platforms, endless ways to reach people. And somehow, you adopted without hesitation. That timing shaped you more than most people realize, because your brain stays highly adaptable well into your mid-20s, which means when the digital world exploded, your mind was still in its prime learning phase. You were young enough to absorb new technology naturally, but old enough to remember what life felt like before it existed. That combination is almost unheard of. People older than you sometimes approach technology cautiously because they met it later. Younger generations often don't question it at all because they never knew life without it. But you experienced both realities. It's almost like being psychologically bilingual. You can disconnect without panic, yet still learn new systems fast. You understand silence, but you're fluent in speed. You remember what it meant to be unreachable for hours, something that's nearly impossible now. And this is where it gets really interesting. Take privacy. You grew up in a time where embarrassing moments faded naturally instead of living online forever. Awkward phases, mistakes, messy nights, they survived only in stories, not permanent records. That changes your relationship with memory itself, because human memory isn't designed to be a perfect archive. It edits, it softens, it reshapes. But constant documentation freezes moments in place, locking them into versions that can't evolve. See, your past feels different from someone who grew up documented. And technology wasn't the only force shaping you. Many of you stepped into adulthood right as the global economy collapsed in 2008, exactly when you were supposed to be building stability. Experiences like that linger psychologically. Financial uncertainty during formative years can permanently change how someone thinks about risk, security, and planning. So you carry a rare combination. You learned to adopt quickly, but you also learned how fragile stability can be. And that mixture isn't talked about nearly enough. Most generational conversations lump millions of people into oversized categories, as if everyone born within decades shares the same experience. But history doesn't shape people in broad strokes, it shapes them in precise moments. And you were shaped during one of the biggest transitions in modern life. You likely developed independence early because constant supervision wasn't the norm yet. You solved your own problems, you entertained yourself, you learned patience without realizing it. but you also entered adulthood during a time when technology still felt exciting, when people believed it might bring everyone closer and make life simpler. That leaves you holding what looks like contradictions: independent yet collaborative, skeptical yet optimistic, analog yet digital. But that tension isn't a flaw, it's the defining feature. You remember the before and the after, which means you can see both what we gained and what we lost. You appreciate convenience, but you also understand the value of slowness. You know how to stay connected and how to be alone with your thoughts. Sometimes that makes you feel slightly out of place, too young for one group, too old for another, like you exist somewhere between worlds. But that in-between perspective might actually be your greatest advantage. Because in a world that keeps changing faster every year, the people best prepared for the future aren't the ones who've only known one reality. They're the ones who have already lived through a transformation. Not because it made them superior, but because it taught them something essential: how to adapt without losing themselves. If this described you, you're not alone. Subscribe for more psychological insights most people never hear.